Uh, Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us this Saturday morning. We have today Andrea Raimondi from Thapar Institute of Engineering and Technology, right? That's the official name, or
Yep.
Thapar University, on depressive thinking. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much again. Thanks you all for having me. So as I said, sorry that I haven't contributed probably as much as I have should to the Indian Philosophical Network. Let me start from today. Okay, so today I'm going to give a talk which is a bit unusual for me because I generally work in the metaphysics of causation and the metaphysics of modality. But I've been working on phenomenology for quite a bit. This is a side project. And because it was a side project, it almost took 5 years to complete. And that is very much completed, 80% of which I'm pretty confident, and I think it's quite solid. I still haven't completed the final section. So what I'm also going to do today that I generally don't do is that I'm going to present a paper that is not complete or published, which is what I generally do. And so there is a final section that I'm still writing, and I'm very much looking forward to see if you guys can help me out on a couple of things I have trouble with. And I'm pretty confident that you can. So this is going to be a talk on the phenomenology of depression, just to do something like exciting and happy on a Saturday morning. In particular, it is a talk in the cognitive phenomenology. It has two parts. The part one is called Depression and Where to Find It, where we're going to do like some basic work in phenomenology. What I'm going to do is to kind of like introduce the logical landscape in the phenomenology of depression, which is dominated by one main view. So that's going to be easy. And I'm going to show that this view is at least incomplete or at worst false when it comes to accounting some experiences of depression that they seems to leave behind, right? And so what I'm going to do is we're going to look at what these experiences of depressions are, why exactly they create problem for what I call the dominant view, and what kind of traits these experiences seems to manifest, right? So that we can have sort of like domain ontology for a phenomenology of depression, and particularly a cognitive phenomenology of depression. So part one will be like the background work. For part two, which is the part where the more meaty, juicy part, if you want, where I am attempting a cognitive phenomenology of depression. So what that means is that I will build it from scratch, right? So the attempt that we're going to do today is to build a cognitive phenomenology for this particular psychopathology. So generally speaking, the talk is about the phenomenology of psychopathology. More precisely speaking, it's within a subfield of it, which deals with theory of depression. So I'm not talking about schizophrenia, and I'm not talking about any other psychopathology, and I'm not claiming that the cognitive phenomenology that I develop, it's applicable to other cases. I think it is, but I have no time nor space to argue for that today, right? Okay, so let's start with part one. So I was mentioning this dominant view. So what's the idea here is that there's been a very long tradition, at least starting with Heidegger, to give great or at least prominent role to mood in the explanation of some psychopathologies, one of which is depression. So generally, the dominant view, the stereotypical example of which I think is made to Ratcliffe, who has a splendid book on the phenomenology of depression, and with which I highly disagree, at least on some respect. The main claim is that depression really is a disorder of mood. And in order to understand the phenomenology of depression, you have to focus only or primarily to the affective changes that the subject experience. This is basically like a nutshell summary of Ratcliffe book, Experiences of Depression. What is interesting, of course, this formulation of the dominant view that I state here, and the reason why we have only and mainly, because obviously you can expect that in such an important and a successful research project, you might find internal differences between views, right? But for the sake of this talk, these differences are kind of negligible. What really matters to me is the kind of like two pillars of this view, which is first, the appealing to mood as an explanatory thing, right? So mood for them are obviously different from cognitive content, different from thoughts, as a matter of the kind of things that they are. So Ratcliffe thinks, for instance, that mood are that kind of sort of affective entities over which we have no control, and when they assail us, okay, they tend to dim down our world. When we have depression, really this is just a shortcut for being in a particular mood. And mood in general, whether they are accompanied with negative affective changes, are the kind of creatures that that Ratcliffe says are possibility condition for meaning attribution. That means that thoughts get their content only after you have a sort of like mood disclosed attitude toward the world, right? Now, these moods have an important role in the explanation of depression because they are related to a second condition that it figures prominent in the view, which is the condition of passivity. So generally, the depressive mood is considered to be a passive mood. Why is considered to be a passive mood? Because phenomenologically, at least according to first-person reports, you can identify some particular condition or phenomenon for which the subject experience some sort of loss. The kind of loss that the subject experiences, a loss in capacities to do things outside in the external world. And according to Ratcliffe and Fuchs and many others, this is because we fail or we stop to perceive the external world as something that makes demand on us, right? So, for example, if we are in a depressive mood and say, originally there is this glass, and this glass affords me grabbing. It calls me to grab. This is the notion of like affordances in the external world. If I'm caught in a depressive mood, I don't perceive this glass as affording anymore. So the reason why I stop doing things, my thoughts slow down, because I perceive the world outside differently. And why do I do so? Because I've been assailed by a mood. That roughly is the story. So what I'm going to claim here, at least in this part, is I'm going to make three claims. First of all, that the dominant view, I'm not here going full-blown rejection of the dominant view. My intent in the paper is to try to claim that this is just incomplete, right? So we need to complete the picture with something else, with a component of the theory that is not already given, because it's undeniable that the dominant view represents some first-order experience of patients that experience depression. What I'm going to claim is that it doesn't represent all experiences, right? So I'm going to claim that there are some recalcitrant pieces of evidence, which is some experiences that the DV doesn't account for, and worst, they resist assimilation to the schema of mood and passivity, right? And as you will see, these experiences is also crucial in understanding the patient lived experience. In a nutshell, these evidences, what we're gonna see is that we're gonna look at evidence where the symptomatology include thoughts, not mood, or at least where thoughts figure prominently, if not exclusively, and where experiences are characterized by activity and not passivity. So that's why I claim to, right? So generally, at the end of this part, we will end up having to face the fact that DV qua paradigm, so qua research agenda, is at least incomplete, and qua proposition, like proposition DV, it's kind of false, right? Okay, so why do the dominant view has the feature that it has? Well, I mean, one of the fault, in a sense, one of the reason is for the way depression, and in these terms, I'm talking about major depressive disorder, is spelled out in the DSM, right? So the DSM sort of gives you a condition to identify a certain psychopathologies, and if you look at the essential feature, if you look at the class, then in the DSM, you straightforwardly have a mood disorder. And if you look at essential feature, all these essential features can kind of like fit in the schema of passivity and mood. One of the things that doesn't really fit much is what is called psychomotor agitation or retardation. Now, these kind of symptoms, it's a very long story and a difficult one. I'm going to touch on it in a second. But one of the reasons why the dominant view doesn't take psychomotor agitation and retardation into account is because probably, generally, I'm being charitable here, the criteria has always been considered diagnostically non-specific, right? So the dominant view focuses on the diagnostically specific essential elements. This is my way of being charitable for why there is not much mention even on psychomotor agitation. When there are issues that touch on psychomotor agitation, phenomenologists belonging to the dominant view seems to adopt a sort of like double standard. So if psychomotor is retardation, so slow speech, slow thinking, decreased body movement, then they totally welcome this as a confirmation of the passivity nature of the symptom. But the moment in which evidence suggests that psychomotor is not retardation but agitation, in a way that we will see in a moment what agitation is, then these evidence are downplayed or relegated to other domains. Classic example is Ratcliffe, that every time you throw at Ratcliffe evidence from first-person report of experience of overexcitement or overactivity in depression, he will just say, oh, but this is mania. This is not depression, it's mania. And unfortunately, this is wrong. This is empirically wrong. It has been shown that actually these kind of experiences are more frequent in the depressive polarity than in the manic polarity, right? So the DV adopts a sort of like strange double standard here. And we understand why, because phenomena that include agitation, which suggests some activity rather than passivity element, doesn't really fit their bill, right? So for DV to be true, it takes for DV to explain all these class of phenomena, the essential feature, and making sure that there are no recalcitrant evidence, no evidence that suggests that the schema doesn't fit the bill for some important experience of depression, right? Unfortunately, for the dominant view, there are such a thing, and there are so many, and they are so prominent in the history of psychiatry. So the kind of recalcitrant evidence as a structure such that there is no one-to-one mapping between the observable slowness of bodily movement and slowness in cognitive activities. You actually have the opposite. You have, if you have it, an observable slowness of movement, but you have an increase in cognitive activity, an overexcitement, right? So what I'm reporting here are, and what we will see in a moment, are pieces of transcript of interviews that I necessarily have to show you because we're doing phenomenology. These transcripts of interview come from a very lengthy book from 1934 by David Lewis, not David K. Lewis, obviously, but clinical psychiatrist in London, who has interviewed patients with major depressive disorder, internalized in the hospital for several months with free mic interview. It means few questions, just listening to the kind of internal reports that the subject has generated. It's very generally difficult to find these evidences, mostly because in contemporary psychiatry, you don't have the possibility of having and publishing these lengthy interviews. But it is interesting that even here, let me minimize you, okay. What you look from Lewis' report is the following, right? Sorry. What the patient appreciates is the difficulty in thinking. What strikes the observer is the slowness in performing the operation. Case 55, who felt he wanted to get everything over in an instant, and at the same time, he wanted to stay in bed all day, gave the impression for all the quantity of energy toward a misdirector. In all these cases, the evidence that these people are collecting are evidences of case of energy, cognitive energy, that doesn't necessarily manifest outside. Now, I'm not going to go in the history of this symptomatology, but it's important to know that this is not cherry picking in the sense that this kind of experience in depression has actually figured prominently at the very beginning in the history of psychiatry, like for instance with Kraepelin. In fact, in the first description of melancholia simplex, which was the original name of depression, much of the description is about what happens cognitively and not what happens affectively. And moreover, these studies about the difficulty in thinking have been transformed into important clinical research around the 70s and 80s, where our idea of depression has changed in terms of whether or not affective change are primary or rather not, in a way that I will specify later. One important thing is that this difficulty in thinking is not associated with mania, it's actually independent of mania. And so much of the clinical research has opened the possibility that given that difficulty in thinking is not mania, is theoretically not incompatible with depression. Right? So this is the kind of stuff that patient reports when they report difficulty in thinking. So I'll give you just a few seconds to just look at this. This is just for the fun. I'm gonna, this is the material that is very difficult generally to see around in the literature. So I'm just reporting because I think it's important. But I'm gonna summarize the theme for you in just a second. So what this difficulty in thinking amounts to at the level of the subject is that the subject experienced disruption in cognitive agency. He experienced thinking or thoughts to some more or less degree that are hard to control, that create a feeling of pain when they want to exercise that control over thinking. They seems to be reporting a very heightened cognitive environment where thoughts seems not only to be outside of the patient control, but they seems to be fast and many, right? And yet many of the patients report this experience to be not unfamiliar at all. So we're not looking at an experience that happens on and off during depressive episode and doesn't happen outside of depressive episode. We are looking at, like clinical research in depression, we are looking at a situation where there is always a degree of difficulty in thinking for depressive patients. And when there are more acute phase, this difficulty in thinking becoming more prominent, more salient for the subject. So if you want to have a look at these testimonies at the level of contemporary clinical approach, you will probably say or paraphrase this experience in terms of racing and crowded thoughts, flight of ideas, and any sort of cognitive phenomena that seems to interfere with the normal pace and process of thinking, right? So what generally patients are lamenting is that there is something wrong with their usual cognitive fluency. And this thing that is wrong, it seems to be due to some form of mental agitation that manifests in this kind of phenomena that today we call racing, crowded thoughts, flight of ideas, right? So even just from this simple characterization, you see that compared to the previous definition of psychomotor agitation, that really doesn't fit the bill. That is not the correct definition of psychomotor agitation. In fact, the point of psychomotor agitation, which is the new name, the new clinical name of what it was called difficulty in thinking of mental agitation, it is not characterized by slow speech or slow thinking. It's actually characterized by an acceleration in thinking and some particular phenomena related to the acceleration of thinking and the interference that this acceleration seems to create, right? Now, this is a problem, obviously, for DV, because if we redefine psychomotor agitation this way, which is the way in which psychomotor agitation appears in experience, then it seems pretty obvious that it seems to defy the passivity condition. Obviously, that seems to be a problem with the mood disorder too, right? Why? Because if DV has to reply to this objection, then DV has to kind of like modify their claim, right? And have to say something, well, depression then, of course, these evidences seems to suggest that depression is always also a cognitive disorder of some kind, at least what we can say just preliminary. And so they have to drop the ambition of generality by saying that all depression, all cases of depression are cases of disorder of mood, because that's false, right? And so they have to say that it's also a disorder of mood, but once you revise it this way, it's kind of like the dominant view loses its generality good dividend, right? And so it's a kind of a big blow, right? But anyhow, in the face of evidence, they must accept at least that the view is incomplete, and at least be skeptical about the fact that mood enjoy any phenomenological primacy of any kind. In fact, if we really have to go strong on them, and I really don't want to do, there are few clinical evidence that seems to suggest that it's actually the other way around. So that is the cognitive dysfunction that happens in depressive peaks that cause these familiar affective negative results, right? So if we want to go full blown against EV, I think we can, but I just want to do it. I'm not interested in that. So before moving to taking these kind of like first person report and making it into a cognitive phenomenology, it would be unfair. Varun, yeah, sorry.
Am I audible? Yeah, so a quick question. So one clarification that I need is that, like, say, how can you go to the previous slide?
This one?
Yeah. How redefining psychomotor agitation retardation compared to MDD, you have given a redefinition of it at the bottom.
Yeah.
How does has a implication on the primacy of the mood disorder? That's where I got confused a bit.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
good,
Yeah.
good. Thanks very much. Sorry, I forgot to say that. So suppose that we modify the view just by, saying that depression is also a disorder of mood, right? So what happens to the primacy claim? So either you stick to the primacy claim or you don't. Let's just suppose that you stick with the primacy claim. Now, if moods are prior to cognitive element, there must be a way in which you can reduce cognitive experience to affective experiences, right? In a sense, this cognitive experience, as we will see later, this cognitive experience, this difficulty in thinking, qua-cognitive experience, comes with an affective component. But it also comes with a cognitive component that is not reducible to any language that only use mood as an operator to describe true sentences in the phenomenology. Okay, so because it's not so reducible, then I don't see how you can claim any primacy of any kind whatsoever, right? Whether maybe causal, but empirical evidence suggests that if you want to go for causal primacy, very likely you're wrong, right? So the primacy should be phenomenological, whatever that means, right? I'm not sure you can reduce the kind of experience that I'm going to describe later to anything about mood at all, only. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So is Ratcliffe's position that mood is cognitive and not affective?
No. Mood is not cognitive at all. It's not a cognitive thing at all. It's what allows cognition to work in a certain way, right?
Yeah, that is what he's saying. It's the background in which things happen.
Because this is stuff that comes from Husserl, Heidegger, background, condition for perception, the Merleau-Ponty's, all that sort of stuff, right? What Ratcliffe is doing is clarify it and actually proficiently build a phenomenology, an affective phenomenology of depression, right? Is that so clear?
For all of these people, then mood is not anyway given. It's not part of the phenomenology at all in that sense.
That is an ambiguous question. So mood is part of the phenomenology in the sense that it's a fundamental posit of their phenomenology, right? But whether there's nothing more to the mood, the depressed mood, than the experiences that you actually don't have outside in the world because you're depressed. So that's the phenomenology. That's what it is to have a depressive mood, to being unable to enjoy, do, and think the stuff that you used to do before, which kind of like fits the folk understanding of depression, because the folk understanding of depression is given by DSM, right? But DSM is a condition for the individuation. They don't say much about the nature of the disorder, right? They actually They come after we had a discussion about the nature of it's the repository for which we register what we thought about the nature of the disorder and where to find it. Right.
Yeah, thanks, and
sorry
for
about
pausing
that.
you.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
That was a very good point. Thanks so much. But we have to be fair that this experience of difficulty in thinking comes with another experiences that generally called difficulty in subjectivity, that is kind of like familiar for friends of the dominant view too, right? And so this difficulty in subjectivity, or what is generally called alienation in the literature, is extremely difficult to pass. And even given first-person report, it is very difficult to try to build a phenomenology for it. The dominant view do it in terms of particular embodied subjectivity. I'm going to talk about later, and I agree partly. But this is the kind of stuff that you expect in a difficulty of subjectivity. It's this kind of like paradoxical situation where the subject talk, but think that it's not them that is doing the talk, have some thoughts, but these thoughts are not produced by them. But at the same time, they recognize that it's kind of like coming from them, right? Particularly interesting is another one that is not from 1933, it's from Alison Bolger. This piece of interview with the subject, she said that sometimes it seems to be her own thought, but I don't get the feeling that it is. She said her own thought might say the same thing, but the feeling isn't the same. The feeling is that it is somebody else. She was asked if she had other people's thoughts put in their head. She said, possibly, but they are, but I don't think of them in that way. They were being put into my mind, very similar to what I would like normally. It's alienation is generally as an experience, a serious kind of word, right? But roughly, it is not unknown in this sort of psychiatrists, and in fact, the first psychiatrists were called alienists, right? But alien experiences are generally understood by a sort of like an emerging sense of self-intrusion or losing oneself to something. But it's very specific because we're not talking about delusional annihilation. So the subject do not believe that someone put something in their head, like with delusional cases accompanied by delusional belief. So there is no alien control here. There is no thought of externality characterizing thought production. So thoughts are not perceived as produced by something else, right? It is somehow recognized that what they are experiencing is nothing but their thinking, right? And of course, their concern is rational. What they are preoccupied about is the implication of losing themselves, what other people will think, how other people will understand what they say, because what they say, they feel it as them, but not made by them, right? So obviously everyone will be worried about that. And of course, even the patient admit that it's almost impossible to articulate the change. So something very similar to a difficulty in thinking here is the difficulty in subjectivity is a sort of an experience of loss of cognitive fluency to something else. But this something else is not personal. It's not personalized like in classic case of alien control. And there is no presence of delusion, like in other cases of alien thinking. So it's a very, very particular kind of experience, right? So what I want to do now is actually try to build a cognitive phenomenology to try to explain what exactly are these experiences, right? Because otherwise the talk will be over here, and the claim is just that the dominant view is incomplete, and worst case scenario, it is just false. But that would be boring, right? At least what we want to do is to make sure that our claim extend to a more substantial one. So we want to make sure that the experience that happen in depression that has to do with cognitions have their own proprietary phenomenology, right? Because that's the job here, right? So we're going to look at subjects who have an experience of depressive thinking, if they are in a mental state, that they know they are in that mental state, that the mental state is non-delusional. And then the subject experiences this mental state as conjointly an experience of difficulty in thinking and difficulty in subjectivity, right? And so what I want to claim here is that this mental state has a proprietary cognitive phenomenology, okay? And the phenomenological structure of experience of depressive thinking, we can draw it from both DT and DS, right? So we can reconstruct, we have sufficient material to make a first attempt, because there are not many cognitive phenomenological depression out there. So to at least make a first attempt in building and at least see what's wrong, see what works, right? I'm gonna I have to make these some assumptions here to get everything off the ground necessarily. So I will assume the truth of expansivism. So I will assume that not all phenomenology is sensory phenomenology necessarily, because I'm doing a cognitive phenomenology of depression. I'm not going to argue for expansivism here, okay? And I'm going to expand expansivism to both cognitive experience and metacognitive experience. I don't see nothing but ad hoc reason to restrict it to cognitive but not metacognitive. I'm going to assume that some experiences are embodied. I think friends of DV will be very, very happy to see this assumption. At the end of the day, my goal is trying to offer a cognitive phenomenology that is kosher enough for a dominant view, right? And the reason why I want to do that is because we're still talking about the same psychopathology, and I want to avoid that the phenomenology of the psychopathology in general is so characterized that the affective phenomenology of it is different, incompatible, or largely different from the cognitive phenomenology of it. I don't want to create kind of like two cracked apart phenomenological domain that then we don't know how to bridge together, right? So I'm going to grant this assumption. I'm happy about it. I mean, I'm going to do something that probably later on DV will like. Obviously, probably won't like assumption one, but they generally never expressed any preference for it. And I'm going to assume that at least some thinking is experienced in terms of cognitive affordances. So again, to make friends of DV happy, I'll make sure that my cognitive phenomenology is built on cognitive affordances, which are simply, in this sense, mental disposition. Why this is kind of like a unifying virtue? Because generally friends of DV, like Ratcliffe, for instance, explain the loss of capacity and the passivity of depression in terms of loss of affordances, right? So I want to make sure we speak the same language to some extent. So compared to what the dominant view does, so the dominant view in regarding to the difficulty in thinking has this idea that this experience, what we're going to call experience of deprivation, is an experience of being wrapped up into something and being incapacitated to work in the external world, and the external world is dimmed down. I agree with the fact that we're going to look at agency interferences, but these interferences do not result from a world that is dimmed down. It's quite the opposite. It's actually the cognitive habitat of the subject is cognitively excited, right? So in part we agree, but we part way at a certain point. Same thing with the difficulty in subjectivity. We both agree that it characterizes depression, but we disagree here on many things. Ratcliffe thinks that it's an experience that is very distant from everyday experience. We disagree because the subject reports it to be an experience that is not uncommon necessarily for them. Generally, in the literature, this kind of experience are articulated negatively as a normal phenomenology minus something. So when you have an experience of alienicity due to an intrusive thought, where you don't perceive authorship, they will say that the phenomenology is characterized by normal phenomenology minus the experience of mindness of thought. I don't want to get, I don't go that way. I actually say the opposite. There is a normal experience plus something else that normal people, non-depressed people do not experience. Okay. Yes. And so let me start directly for DV for the sake of time, DV and deprivation. So what I'm going to generally take difficulty in thinking to be is what in literature, at least in cognitive science, has been defined as a metacognitive experience, okay, that inform a person about some cognitive features of some thinking, right? So, for instance, Euclides, which is the person that has worked more specifically on difficulty in thinking, thinks that it's a product of an inferential process, and I'm not very sure about that, but it doesn't matter, that monitor the progress being made toward a goal and inform the subject in an affective manner, right? And this difficulty in thinking, it is experimental findings show that they are accompanied with some negative effects, okay? So negative feeling, right? But for people that work on this particular kind of metacognitive experience that are now very well famous after Flavel in 1976, they understand these metacognitive experiences as defined in terms of at least both affective and cognitive characters, right? So the point is that if all of this is true, right, and not a cognitive science, so I kind of like can't really assess. If this is true, then we should expect that the kind of like cognitive processing, the depressive cognitive processing, must appear in experience too, and must be accessible by a subject, because it's an aspect of the metacognitive experience. And in our case, in fact, they do, right? Because all the reports that we have seen are reported where the subject is able to access what is going wrong in some particular cognitive processing, right? So, as I was saying, generally, when cases of difficulty in thinking are framed in terms of intrusive thoughts, what is generally understood is that the phenomenology of this subject lacks something like agentive mindedness, right? What I want to do instead is to characterize it in terms of interference of cognitive affordances here. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to take a definition of cognitive affordances as we have it from, for instance, McClelland, and so not offer any particular novel definition, and show that as is doesn't really work. But if we understand the definition of cognitive affordances through a dispositional characterization, because affordances are disposition, we might end up discovering a couple of things or two about what are these cognitive experiences that happen during the metacognitive experience of difficulty in thinking, right? So the idea, as I was saying before, is that it seems that in all first order report, the kind of conceptualization of thinking that all patients have is thinking in terms of an activity, right? So I will join the band of these people. I myself believe that that is the best way to understand thinking, but I'm not going to argue for that right now. But like, for instance, Marta Jorba thinks that if you want to say something meaningful about the experience of thinking, apart from the experience of entertaining a certain content, it is also the experience on being able to see or know or feel what you can do with certain thoughts, or how to continue in a chain of thought, or how to stop thinking, and so on so far, right? So there are many more things that entertain in a thought that we do in our head, and that are cognitive experience. But unfortunately, with the kind of a definition of affordance that McClelland, which is, I think, so far the most recent and best definition used in the market, but you might tell more. This definition of affordance doesn't really work, right? So its definition is that X afford thing for S, if and only if X offers an opportunity for S to feel, right? Where phi is a mental action, and X is a cognitive element, thought, if you want, and S is a subject, right? So what is the idea of this affordances definition? Is that for things to work in our head, both the cognitive element and the subject must have mutual dispositional partner, as John Isle would put it, right? So I have the capacity to grab this glass, and this glass has the capacity to be grabbed by me. In the language of affordance, that entails that there are mutual affordances, the interaction of which creates successful results, like me drinking, right? So the idea is that this definition creates also a kind of like definition of possibilities for what is possible to do mentally for me, because of course, the idea is that it is possible to feel, so it's possible to mentally act in such and such a way, if there is an affordance, right, to the effect that feel. Okay, so given that you know, what we can afford according to this paradigm is what we can experience, the kind of cognitive achievement and mostly the experience that we have of our cognitive achievement are underpinned by cognitive affordance, by what we experience to be our cognitive skills. What is this problem with this definition? Is that it is immediately problematic for the kind of cases that we examine, right? So for the kind of cases that we examine, it's clearly that the patient experiences the cognitive element as soliciting certain thing, and she experienced also herself not thing. This is the kind of like 2 and 3 that we get from the report, right? But if we plug affordances in the picture, then obviously we have that, then there are no affordances such that S can successfully fee, right? But if there are no affordances, it is also the case that X never afforded feeing in the first place, right? But this is not the experience from the first person report. They are not misperceiving cognitive affordances when they are saying that, oh, it's really hard to control my thought, or they spin and I can't stop them, or they cause me pain, right? The pain and the negative affective dimension of the metacognitive experience is exactly the fact that the subject reports an inability to feel in response to something that solicited feel. That is the painful experience, right? So I think we should, if we commit to a more robust dispositional characterization, we can get some benefit, right? First of all, the definition as is for the biconditional doesn't allow for a manifested disposition to exist despite the presence of the right stimulus, which I think it's the whole problem here, right? And also, not having a dispositional characterization is such that you really can appreciate the fact that many mental actions are complex. Like, for instance, understanding is a complex activity and it's made of many things, right? And when subjects lament the inability to, for instance, control their thoughts, do not lament a complete inability to control their thoughts. They lament an ability to control the thoughts to some extent, right? So having a dispositional characterization of the cognitive side allows you to actually make sense of these degreeness of lack or loss of cognitive fluency, right? But let's get straight to the point on the robust dispositional characterization here. So the idea, so what I wanted to say here is, if we allowed for manifested dispositions or manifested mental affordances, even in the presence of the right stimulus, here we go. We seem to be able to, first of all, fine-grainedly distinguishing between two experiences in the experience of deprivation. One, which is deprivation properly understood, and another one that I call an experience of exclusion, right? So what is the idea? Is that it's not enough to say that there are cognitive interferences. You might want to say that there are different kinds of cognitive interferences. Look at example of adapted from Whittle, Ty John and BBD John, right? In the first case, John is a skilled swimmer. He's tied to a chair. He watched helplessly a child drowning in a lake. In the other case, he's a skilled swimmer. He's not tied, but he has a particular kind of disease, so that every time he stands up, he broke his legs, right? Now, this is obviously like different kind of interferences that are both interference, but the distinction is how John fails in both cases. In the first case, John has been deprived, in the sense has been prevented to exercise something that is in full John's control, right? While in the case of BBD John, the very circumstances that triggers John's attempt to stand up are the circumstances that remove John's ability to actually swim, right? So an experience of deprivation is something like that, right? John's disposition to fee is here retained. It's just like causally prevented, right? So the experience of being prevented from thing in response to something, a thought thing, is what I call a case of cognitive masking, where the subject is still sensitive to thing, but it's less as sensitive to X, a thought thing. Think about case of dispositional masking in terms of like wrapping a fragile vase, right? It's not because I wrap a fragile vase that now the vase is not fragile anymore. It's just less sensitive to bumps. That's why we use bubble wrap, right? Importantly, in this sense, the subject doesn't misperceive affordances nor X affording thing. It just correctly registers a diminished sensitivity to X affording thing in this particular conflict. So it's not explained as a cognitive error where something is missing or where S would have succeeded in thing had she correctly perceived it so. No. In any of those cases, in the experience of deprivation, the subject just retained the ability to feel. It just prevented from feeling successfully. This is the element of just, let's just say, the cognitive pain, right? The cases of exclusion are a little bit different. So in cases of exclusion, if you want to put it like more naturally, the subject attempt to feel is being held in response to something affording thing. These are cases of generally cognitive think, right? So what I'm trying to do here, I'm just taking a classic dispositional analysis and then apply to cases where this dispositional analysis hasn't been applied, right? So the idea is that S is sensitive to thing, trying to feel, but S own ability to feel is completely compromised. Not the efficacy of S thing, but the ability in the first place, right? So S is not prevented from succeeding in thing, it's prevented from trying in the first place. It's not less sensitive, it's just insensitive to this kind of cognitive element affording thing, right? And so you have reports like the report in point 3, where you can clearly see that this experience of cognitive thinking really just are experience of action or anything experienced as inconsequential, right? There are a couple of important points here, but I will skip for the sake of, because I'm already late. So the idea is that we can build a proprietary phenomenology, at least for cases of difficulty in thinking, simply by understanding the cognitive aspect of the metacognitive experience as cases of deprivation and exclusion. And we can do that by being a little bit loaded in our dispositional analysis of cognitive affordances. And notice that once we do that, then, you know, deprivation and exclusion represent exactly the kind of cognitive situation where progress toward the goal is either impede or reach an halt, right? Which is exactly what that kind of definition of metacognitive experience will predict, right? So good. The experience of alienation. So as I said, and just to conclude, because I'm really, it's difficult to have my head around this experience, but here's what I have in mind, and maybe we can conclude with this, and you can tell me what you think. We know that it's very hard two parts. We might think that because the difficulty in thinking is a metacognitive experience, that we might try to, mutatis mutandis, think that difficulty in subjectivity too is a metacognitive experience, okay? But then if that is the case, we should expect that this difficulty in subjectivity has a corresponding cognitive aspect, but we don't find any corresponding cognitive aspect in the reporting of the experience. What is reported is only a sense of self-intrusion, which is cognitively agnostic. We are not reporting any dysfunction, right? And so it seems very difficult to say that it's a metacognitive experience because it will be a weird one, lacking a cognitive access, okay? There is no experience of any particular interferences, like in the case of difficulty in thinking. You might think that because we experience DT and DS conjointly as an experience, like they both maybe co-refer to the same cognitive aspect, but then I don't know, because then I have to explain why exactly they occur conjointly instead of not, given that they have the same cognitive aspect, right? A take 3 would be to claim that maybe a difficulty in subjectivity doesn't have a cognitive aspect or doesn't have a cognitive character. But I find it very unlikely because the subject, it's true that the subject find it difficult to articulate the experiential change, but they clearly represent something. This experience represents something in themselves as being in a certain way, right? So it kind of like sounds like an intentional, at least an intentional stance or an intentional state representing something, right? So I think that what I want to do here, so my proposal is the following: either that the difficulty in subjectivity is another aspect of the metacognitive experience. This aspect is non-cognitive but embodied, and the contrast is not quite right, but just for the sake of explaining myself. Or the difficulty in subjectivity as a cognitive character, just non-representational. So what is how do I get to this idea here? So take a statement which I take to be kind of like paradigmatic of the whole experience of depressive thinking, which is, it's not me, it's the thinking, right? So look at the first part, and it's not me. The sentence is basically, oh, it's not me who's fucking up, right? So the subject of this parcel are the interferences, like the X such that X is thing and X is not me, right? What it is that is not me. These interferences that I'm experiencing. The subject is different, right? The subject is doing is whatever is doing what I am not doing. So the subject two is the thing that we can do, right? But it's not experienced in personal terms. So it's not someone else, right? So we don't want to go in experience of alienation that are like this sort of exotic creature, foreign minus, Husserl share null point, Sartre absence of others. It's a bit difficult for me, at least for me, to swallow. Right? Also, you notice that clearly, to me, you can't have the same referent in part one and part two of the sentence, because the subject are not committed to any absurdities like it's not me, it's me. Me and the thinking are not replaceable. They're not equivalent terms here. The subjects are saying something different, right? And they are different also in the sense that, you know, one is propositionally accessible. If I tell you that it's not me, I can tell you what it is that is not me. It's not me the fact that I have some cognitive interference of this kind and this is happening. But it's the thinking is not equally cognitive, is propositionally accessible, right? That's the reason why patients find it very difficult to articulate that change, because they don't know what's going on. They have a vague sense, right? So my proposal is take statement like P as equivalent to statement like Q, where statement like Q are of the form, it's not me, it's my stomach, it's not me, it's my head, and so on and so far. So I'm taking subject here to not talking about thinking in terms of like functions or particular cognitive processes that they are going wrong. They're talking about the thinking, which I take to be the stuff that does the thinking. So the proposal in a nutshell, before I close, is that these experiences are experiences of what it's like to have a brain that we have, particularly an embodied brain. There is a whole bunch of ways to defend this claim from clinical research. And generally, we simply have to drop the assumption that the brain is phenomenologically dead. Because the brain actually is, because it's embodied, it is constantly active in the sense that it generates content that is related to self-regulation of internal stimuli that have nothing to do with the outside, right? So from the neuroscience perspective, it kind of like makes sense to say that there is something that is like to have a brain that we have and embodied. What I want to say about this particular kind of experiences is that these are what are called visceral experience. So the way Ratcliffe explained alienicity is to say, oh, we feel alien because we experience a body, not like a body as a subject, Merleau-Ponty stuff, but as a body of an object. We perceive it as intrusive, as an obstacle between what we want to do, our project as subject, and the execution of our project. And I disagree. I don't think it's the experience of a body as an object, because the body of an object is particular only accidental and non-regular intrusion on you. Like, I don't know, you fall on the street while you go in to give a lecture, and suddenly all your daily plan to go and give a lecture disappear because you have to go to the hospital, right? But that fortunately doesn't happen every day. Visceral experiences are similar, and though they are more regular because they are phenomena that can be grounded on particular kind of pathologies. I think I'm very late, so I have to stop here, and maybe I have to open for question, and I can touch on things in question times.
Thank you, Andrea. Questions and comments from the audience? Yes, Shruti?
Yeah. Hi, Andrea. Thank you for the talk. I just, this is a kind of a bit obviously clarificatory question more than comments, because there are so many things which I have to still process. But my first question is, so you are trying to put together difficulty in thinking and this difficulty in subjectivity, that is this kind of an alienation, right? If I have tried to understand it.
Yeah, they happen together. Yeah.
Yeah, this is my, I mean, I'm still not ready to accept that that happens all the time together. Is it like, is it something like an empirical evidence, or because difficulty in thinking, like when it is depression, yes, I understand that there is something going on, like a mental chat or thing which actually deprives you from to think the way you want to think, right? So there is this kind of a cognitive problematic thing. So, but it need not all the time be accompanied with your way of saying that there is, kind of difficulty in subjectivity, right? So maybe it's something like, I also will say that I'm unable to control that. Am I going the correct direction? So
so the fact is that they are always reported together, right? And in fact, the case of report of alien experience predate also case of more fine-grained case of what kind of cognitive experience is going wrong. Generally, so in clinical research on depression, they will absolutely back the claim that this kind of like difficulty in thinking happen always. Okay. Subject might or might not repurpose these cognitive idiosyncrasies of the depressed patient for something functional or useful, right? But the experience of the difficulty in thinking is always accompanied to the fact that with the other experience, which is complementary to the experience of difficulty in thinking, in the sense that you just don't, it's not that you just experience a lack of cognitive fluency. Okay. You also experience the fact that this is due to something.
yes.
Right? So for instance, you don't have the experience that I can't calculate, I can't do this calculation, or I can't rerun Kraepelin on the necessity of identity argument because I'm tired. And so the fact that there is some interference is entirely due to fact about me. No, none of these difficulties are due to fact about me. That is the thing, right? And it's a conjoined experience. It goes together. Now, I have split the experience because it's a very complicated thing, right? And so I wanted to analyze like separately. But they are not, and they are not experienced like, oh, I experienced some difficulty in thinking, and then I experienced some difficulty in subjectivity. I experienced both together, right? What can be different is the intensity at which you can experience these cognitive experiences. Because at least today in contemporary clinical research, depression is not folk depression, that you have depressive state and then everything's fine, then you might have another depressive state. Rather, depressive brains are characterized by quite a volatility in oscillation of cognitive fluency. In some peaks of the volatility, the thought is experienced still as an overexcited process, but because it's not accompanied by the negative effect, it is actually perceived positively. In fact, these are cases of overexcitement similar to mania that we don't problematize at the level of psychopathology, because culturally, we tend to associate productivity and creativity with good. While in case of peaks of overactivity and creativity, the person is actually having a depressive episode, but you don't see it, because your understanding of depression is a bit old, right? When you get the classic negative depressive episode spike, you have emphasis of the classic affective change that the dominant view push forward, right? So you can, yeah.
So it's something like, yeah, you're saying that it is, yeah, overexcited is something like, yeah, you have a lot of cognitive activity which is happening.
Yeah.
And so the difficulty in thinking is something like, yeah, difficulty in probably, yeah, something like purely correctly understanding something or calculating something on these things. So because of this overexcitement, it is something like the agent, the person who has depression will be facing this difficulty in thinking.
Correct. And it's quite overwhelming, obviously.
Oh, well, yes, yes. My point is fine till here, it makes sense. But then you also said then that the agent has difficulty in this affordance. That is, so I'm not able to connect the affordance part and these two. And if this is the scenario of depression, then how it is all the time connected with difficulty in subjectivity? I mean, only this much can be depression, right? That there is like excitement, some thinking all the time going on, and it is just disrupting and difficulty in thinking. That's all. I'm not supposed to.
No, because like in the experience of the kind of experience that a subject has of this kind of cognitive environment is an experience is obviously different from, say, a normal experience, whatever that means. Okay, so let's just assume that a normal experience of your cognitive environment is you being obviously in control of certain process of thinking. Okay. And then obviously being characterized by also all the kind of exotica that we want to put in a picture, flight of ideas, a bit of my wandering, thoughts that pop, that is absolutely fine. But the kind of phenomena that happens in the difficulty of thinking in this sort of brain is that thoughts are experienced so much afar from the kind of normal control and fluency you would expect to have within your own head, that it almost looked like living in a habitat, like a la Gibson, that it's polluted, right? In fact, much of these, I haven't mentioned that, but much of these experience of difficulty in thinking also are accompanied by experiences of perceptual experience of thought. So the thoughts become more audible or become audible altogether. They are perceived with rapidity. And although it might seem strange, the speed of thought is a technical term in cognitive science. So it measures the rates at which you have thinking and also the diversity of this thinking. At situation of great rapidity of thinking and diversity, you don't want to be in your head, because your head is alive and you are not the one in control. So the difficulty in subjectivity is due to the fact that now inside your head, you feel like you've been pushed in a corner and someone else is using the living room.
Exactly. That's the point. I mean, I'm just trying to say that this entire experience, should it be really conceived as alienation? Can't I say that it is something like I'm able to not control the things, like like how I'm not able to, maybe I do have something in my hand, I'm just giving a comparison. For example, maybe my hand is not working properly and I'm not able to grab the glass. Yes. Then I wouldn't say that that's not my body. I mean, I wouldn't alienate it. I would say that there is no control of that thing to kind of whatever the agency which controlled my action, physical action, is not so active. So can't I put it something like that?
Oh, wait. You just said the agency that controlled my action. Wait a second. What does it mean here? Because, okay, so maybe we're just talking past each other. We're saying the same thing. In difficulty of subjectivity, what I'm experiencing, well, in my proposal as the kind of cognitive experience is that you really just experience your brain being active, which is not experiencing any thought content. It is not experiencing any function in particular. You're just noticing that your brain is working strangely. Now, for me, this as an embodied claim, because we utter these embodied sentences all the time with similar feeling of alienation. Bodily org, for instance, the kind of visceral experience that I was mentioning, which I think that the experience of alienation is a visceral experience, is an experience of a bodily organ, generally, later 1990, okay? And this experience of bodily organ are particular because, for instance, think about the experience that you can have of your stomach, right? You cannot experience your stomach unless your stomach is doing something. Maybe it feels bad. Maybe it's contracting because you drink too much alcohol, right? It is in case where something goes wrong that you feel your stomach. If your stomach is fine, you don't feel your stomach. The organs do not appear in the phenomenological field of experience. In fact, they disappear for a good reason, right? Same thing as the body. If you, by taking a walk, all of a sudden you will be aware of your body as an object, as Ratcliffe will say, it will be impossible to walk. Your body as an object should disappear from your field of experience when you have a walk, right? Same stuff for organ. Now, the brain is an organ. And definitely it is not experienceable in an ecstatic way. So we cannot sense the brain. In that sense, the brain is sort of like phenomenologically a piece, right?
Yeah.
But the brain does things, including thinking, right? And it's not just the brain that thinks. And every time that I talk about the brain, I apologize, but I really mean the whole nervous system, right? But I'm just as a shortcut, right? So while the stomach does so many things, okay, the brain too, including thinking. So the experience of alienation for me is really just an embodied experience. Is what it feels like to have a certain brain, a depressed brain, in a body, right? It's an experience of embodied brain.
Okay, then can I kind of say, so how is like move? Can I make and say that then the mere fact that the subject is able to talk about it says that still the subject is not alienated the way they are.
Yeah, but the problem is the subject is able and unable to talk about it. Okay. The subject have statements that are very difficult to crack. So the subject knows that there's nothing wrong with them, first of all, and they are not delusional, right? But they also gesture towards something that is going wrong. And this thing that is going wrong is not the same thing that is going wrong when they lament a difficulty in thinking. So there is something that they are experiencing, right? It's a distinctive experience. That's why alienation is difficult to crack, because it's a distinctive experience, but most of the phrasing of this experience are quite paradoxical, right? It's not me, it's my consciousness. What does it mean? It's not me, it's my thinking. It looks like it does make sense, but it makes sense to them, and that is the best articulation that they can get. My hypothesis is that this experience do not have a representational content. So they are cognitive experience, okay? But they're not the kind of cognitive experience with the representational content good enough to let me access what it is exactly that is going wrong, like in difficulty in thinking. In difficulty in thinking, everyone is pretty well aware of what is going on. In difficulty of subjectivity, they are not. So my hypothesis is that, given that I think it's implausible that they don't have a cognitive aspect, for other reason, there must be a cognitive aspect, and so maybe the thing is that simply is non-representational, right? And so it's an embodied cognitive aspect, some of which are non-representational, right? And then problem solved.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'll
You're
leave.
welcome.
Others? Yes, Varun.
Andrea, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. I have to confess that, like, say, of course, the talk was very well structured and everything. My confession is that, like, since I don't belong to this domain, it was difficult for me to follow some of the aspects. Also, yeah, I mean, I think it is also getting used to the abbreviations that you're using,
Yeah,
because
sorry.
like it was just difficult to catch every time what is happening and everything. Anyways, I mean, like it's a lack on my side. That's all I would say.
Let's do it now.
No. Let's not. But um, I would point out that, like, you have to handhold me a bit to ask to make my question clear, in the sense that, like, I don't know whether they are clarificatory question or what they are in that sense. So help me have a clear phenomenological thought here. Okay. So probably we can start with the last question first. I mean, like what Shruti was asking here. While going through, while you were presenting, it didn't occur to me then, but while you were responding to Shruti's question, I felt that, like, say, the way you're splitting up the experience of depressive patient, that, like, say, now I can take this experience, split it into two components, like difficulty in thinking and difficulty in subjectivity. And you mentioned that most of the time it comes together, but the emphasis of these two can vary depending on the peak of their depression. I felt there was no argument. Conveniently, they can be
Oh,
split
wait,
up.
sorry, you just lag. I lost the best moment.
Am I back now? Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just saying that, like, say, when you mentioned that, like, say, I will split the problem into two components, difficulty in thinking and difficulty in subjectivity. I felt there is no argument for doing the split, the possibility of doing the split.
That
So
is easy. I can tell you immediately that the splitting is because this is already very difficult experience to examine. So for pedagogical purpose only, I have treated them separately. Okay. But even in the first person report that I mentioned at the beginning, the same people reporting difficulty in thinking, they also report difficulty in subjectivity, right? So these two experiences, so either there are not two experience, so we go for my proposal 4.2 and say that the difficulty in subjectivity is actually another character or another aspect of difficulty in thinking that will make, obviously, the two experience being numerically one by default, but they will be so as a matter of logic and not as a matter of phenomenology. But it's obviously it's a solution, right? It avoids that problem. I don't have a particular view of what makes, because I don't have a particular view on the unity of consciousness. So I really can't tell you what it is for two experiences to be conjoined, apart from the fact that they are reported together. I don't have any philosophically meaty story for why they occur together. They just do, right?
Correct.
What I'm doing here is literally phenomenology of psychopathology. I have to stick to the report, and the report seems to suggest that at least these two things comes together. So either there are two things that come together, or it's really just one thing. And the difficulty, my difficulty with alienation is that I am not persuaded strongly by any two options. I don't know.
Yeah, and also the way you put it while responding to Shruti gave me some clarity on these two difficulties are of different kinds, right? I mean, the way you yourself present it made it clear in that sense.
Yeah.
One is a difficulty in a process like thinking. I mean, I know I cannot process something. It's an activity in that sense. On the other side, subjectivity is a lack of a certain, I can't identify what it is in the sense that it's a kind of probably like, say, I can see this thing and I cannot not be able to identify it in that sense, what it is.
It's more like in the second part is more like I feel there is something with me in my head, or someone with me in my
or
head,
probably
without believing.
True.
Right.
Now, I'm just saying this difficulty are of two different kinds in that sense,
Yeah.
and might help you build that argument, because I felt that the argument you presented didn't leverage this point further, because
Okay.
leveraging that would make your arguments I don't know, have more bite into it.
Different. I didn't. So here's the thing. I didn't want to. So difference. It depends. Difference depends on what kind of difference makes, right? So I don't. I'm not ready. I don't want to say that they are different in kind. That is my problem. So I don't think I will be intelligent to say anything like that. They are surely different. The difference here is phenomenological, and if you want it, a difference of the kind of impact that this thing has on the subject. So in a difficulty in thinking can really drive you insane because of cognitive disruption, right? The impact of this experience of alienation is the impact of feeling that something is doing this to you. Right?
That is true, yeah.
Right, which is the difference between having misfortune and believing that they are because of your doings, and having misfortune and believing that that's because someone else like put an evil eye on you. They are phenomenologically, you will react to this experience doing completely different thing, right? Evil eye, you go to someone, or you're doing, you improve yourself. So very different.
True. And I think all of this goes back to the central point that like it's part of the same experience, which is described in two sentences or two ways in that sense. So that is where I think the central problem lies, or central, how to put it, presumption is a big presumption in your, also, now going back to this one, can you go back to the first initial slides where you said that, like, say, the DMM defines MDD defines how psychomotor in a particular way, and you're redefining it in a particular way.
Yeah. So this is
probably
really.
The next,
can you?
There was
here we go. So here's the thing. So there's a whole other talk about the history of psychiatry here. So the thing is the following: the psychomotor agitation has been worked out clinically in more contemporary terms since the 80s, but it really didn't take off as a project, if not by say mid 90s. Okay. And generally, because depression was understood as a mood disorder since Kraepelin, despite actually having misread Kraepelin, the agitation part of the psychomotor component was generally associated with manic depression, or the manic polarity of depression. What you see here is the introduction of psychomotor agitation in DSM-5 after many years of fights in the psychiatry community to try to understand exactly what this psychomotor agitation is, right? Because psychomotor agitation was first not in MDD, but in manic disorder, manic depression, and in mixed state depression, when you have mixed of like passivity and activity states. Now we know that this is not correct, okay? And it is actually psychomotor agitation an integral part of a diagnosis of depression, right? So obviously you don't see it in the DSM-5, because also the DSM-5 is not a book about psychiatric theories. it's a manual, it's a textbook, that it's a guide for practitioners, right? So it's the last bit of written thing that sees any new updates. It's actually the last one, right? Now, fortunately, what the clinical research has shown that psychomotor agitation is not mania, is independent of mixed states, and that was a good thing, because obviously, if it belongs to mania, and we think mania to be incompatible with depression as MDD, then depression doesn't include psychomotor agitation. But we managed to kind of like sort that out clinically. So you might want to expect that at some point this change will be reflected. It's already been reflected. It's just that the description of psychomotor agitation and retardation, as you can see, privilege characteristic of the retardation and not the agitation. There is no active thinking. That's the problem.
Yeah, the one comment that I have about this, your improvisation on what is there. I mean, like the bottom part is your addition to that, right? I mean,
yes, this one.
yeah. So, of course, it's a very good move of taking what is there on the psychiatric domain and making it open enough for philosophy of phenomenology to start doing something with it, because clearly the way you have articulated psychomotor agitation retardation, you have given phenomenological attributes to it, which I'm sure psychiatry, by as a discipline of whatever it is, medicine, whatever it is, would not be interested in that sense.
Oh, no, I disagree with you. Just look at the word mood and try to ask a psychiatrist what a mood is.
No, I mean, like probably the mood also, the way the psychiatry as a discipline would understand is would be very different, or at least would have a slightly different hue to it than what.
No. Because
the
funny thing is that the history of psychiatry is like very close to the history of phenomenology on this thing. And in fact, much of psychiatry has been influenced by the affective phenomenology after Heidegger. And it's exactly the reason why they forgot the cognitive component of depression. The cognitive component of depression, it was depression at the beginning. For 40 years, that was the main symptomatology for depressive patient, right? Then there has been a sort of like an affective switch, okay? And this affective switch changed the practice in psychiatry. So that while for Kraepelin, it was not a disorder of mood, or at least not only, and mood are described as secondary. In the DSM is a disorder of mood. And mood, they mean by mood stuff a la Heidegger. There's no clinically anything that it's a mood. There might be a sensation, emotion, but mood is an entirely theoretical construct, right? And so
no, I mean, mood might be one factor. I'm just pointing out to the case here that, like, say, psychiatry as understood now, the way it would want, like, say, even the DSM or in all of these places, the whatever factors, the symptoms and everything, and whatever constitutes psychomotor agitation, retardation, what are its symptoms and all of those things, has to go through several trials of clinical trials, experiments. And so the methodology of establishing how to tease out psychomotor retardation, the methodology is very different as understood, irrespective of the history of psychiatry, which I completely agree with you in that sense. No, why I'm trying to point out is that, like, say, the way they would tease out or articulate, these are the features of psychomotor agitation retardation, has to make itself amenable for clinical trials in that sense. Whatever clinical trials that psychiatry follows at present might be very different.
They do, in fact. All the people that want to think, but these people here, especially Kokopoulos, Saningemi, Benazzi, these are all people that work on these cognitive theory they have worked on a cognitive theory of depression. And all of this stuff here, if you wanna analyze this stuff clinically, for instance, it will be not distant from a common measure for racing thoughts or crowded thoughts or speed of thoughts. Right? So if you want to give a clinical paraphrasing, you will say that psychomotor agitation, aka raising thoughts, and so on so far, right?
No, that is true. All I'm trying to point out here is that since that comes in a different, see, the thing is the causation there is established very differently through clinical trials and measuring certain things, which is very peculiar to psychiatry as a discipline in that sense. Now, all I was trying to point out and make explicit here is that, like, say, the way it would count as an evidence, like, say, for example, what is important here is that, like, say, you're using these features 1, 2, 3, 4 as as evidence for the person is going through psychomotor agitation in that sense.
Correct, because this
Now,
is
that is where I think a bit more work it needs to be done in establishing or showing that how you would interpret that as evidence would be different or would be in aligned with the evidence constituted in psychiatry as a domain of science. That's a minefield in itself. Yeah, that is a minefield in itself. Yeah. So I thought of pointing that out. Anyways, I think I'm also taking 2 minutes. I'll come back to it. Jyoti has a question. I don't want. Yeah. There are 2 or 1 more question. I'll come back to it in the end. But thanks, Andrea, if I don't get time.
Welcome.
Hi,
Jyoti?
thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
Hello.
So as you said, this was like 5 years, like the study was spanned over 5 years, even though it was your side project. So I was just wondering, before that, I just want to mention that I'm a second year PhD student. And recently, as a part of my TA activity, I came across the concept of cognitive dissonance. So I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was just wondering if you also came across any kind of relevance, because the way you characterized difficulty in thinking and difficulty in subjectivity, it seemed as if it was very similar to what happens in cognitive dissonance, you know?
What kind of phenomena are cognitive dissonance here? Because sometimes it's used in a folk sense, sometimes in a technical, but there are many. Is there any definition of it that you're thinking mostly?
The one that I have in mind is that when you have an attitude or some kind of belief, but you have a behavior or action which does not correspond to the attitude and belief, such that one of them needs to be changed to have an alignment. So I was thinking about attitude and belief falling into the category of thinking, and this behavior and action to be falling in the category of subjectivity, something to do with identity. And then more
in the liberal sense, of course, there is dissonance in the sense. There is dissonance in, for instance, in the experience of difficulty of thinking, because every experience of difficulty of thinking are always had from a background of what is familiar to you, right? So, for instance, suppose that you are not very good at math, right? And then you have to solve quadratic equations every day, and you're not very good at it, so you always find difficulties solving this equation. Then tomorrow you wake up, you try again, it seems difficult again. But this difficulty is just like normal for you because you're not very good at solving quadratic equation. Now, suppose that you are very good at solving quadratic equation and you've always been good, and one day you wake up and you can't, right?
Right.
This is a form of dissonance, if you want to put it like that, right? And this dissonance is due to the fact that, wait a second, I'm familiar with my mental skills. I'm familiar with the fact that whenever I want to solve a quadratic equation, I actually do. Now, what is that? Why now I can? Because I know that I can, but I'm unsuccessful. And that's strange, because if I can, I must be successful mentally, right? That's what we assume. If I know how to solve a quadratic equation, I won't ask myself before doing so whether I'm sure that I can, or where maybe this time I wouldn't. No, you will, right? That's what it means to be skillful, right?
Right. So now that you have mentioned this example, could you also tell me about difficulty in subjectivity, how that creeps in, like as if like is it something like I am not able to identify with myself because I used to be a person
It's
who
kind of that's what makes alien experience extremely difficult, right? Because look what you're saying. You're saying there is something me and there is something else, and I can't identify with that something else. But it's first of all, from the first person report, we know that the whatever else is not personalized. So it's always you and your thinking and nothing more. The dissonance in this case is that while the familiar experience of thinking and perhaps, which is perhaps maybe wrong, which is the experience of us thinking that our mind is, whatever our mind is fully under our control, and nothing happens under our vigilant eyes unless we decide so, which is obviously wrong, because the experience of mental beings, the experience of having a mind, is an experience of being able to do things, but also it's an experience of stuff happening. When you mind wander, you're not controlling the mind wander. Otherwise, it's just, by definition of mind wander, you have to let your mind go, right? Your mind just generates train of thoughts, right? And that is completely fine. That is not an alien experience, because mind
Right.
wander is just like bubbles of thoughts with no particularly coherent thing. While in the case of alienicity, there seems to be something stealing mental power from you and sharing your point of view, right? When you have an experience, for instance, in case that we haven't touched, because it's another talk of the increased perceptivity of thinking. So in many, many patients, thoughts is experienced in a perceptive sense. So in the depressed patient, you don't only know that the thinking is faster, you perceive it as faster, and you perceive it as audible. You can hear your thoughts. So a classic case of alienicity or alienation in relation to this specific aspect only is that when you're thinking, you have to do something, there is someone in your head talking to you the stuff that you have to do. So you
Right.
hear your thoughts. Imagine being able to, I don't know, you have to write a small essay on spot. Imagine being able, taking this, going with a plan of structuring, and then not doing what is under your control, but being dictated what to do by thoughts that are audible, that are obviously of no one's but yours,
Mhm.
but it's still creepy, right?
Yeah, I get it.
Because when our experience of thinking is not an experience of listening, it's an experience of constructing, right? Yeah, that's it.
Right,
That's
right,
one kind of dissonance that can happen. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think that's it from my side. Thank you so much.
Ariane.
Hello. Yeah, hi.
Hello.
So that was amazing. I loved it, you know.
I
I
know.
was just I just wanted to build something on the question that Dr. Shruti and Jyoti asked. Something about the dissonance. It's not particularly a question, maybe something like a hypothetical
Go shoot it anyway.
understanding. Um, the line that you said, it's mentioned. Can you go to probably slide 23? It's not me, it's thinking.
Yeah, this one. 23?
Yeah, yeah.
No, it's not
No, it's
23.
probably later.
It's 27. Yeah, this
27.
one.
Yeah, it's not me, it's thinking. So what I understood by this is it's not me, it's thinking. That is causing me mental pain, but also dictating certain actions. The whole
Yes.
the whole kind of mental process or the thought that
Yes.
crosses my mind.
Yeah.
And when Jyoti mentioned cognitive dissonance, what struck my mind is possibly there's a conflict. There's a state of normalcy in my mind with a certain set of ideas and schemas,
Yeah.
which is my normalcy, right? And
Yes.
that normalcy not being achieved in this particular state leads to a conflict in my mind where there's a thought that does not resonate with the normalcy. So that conflict leads me to believe, because, like you said, your mind wonders why. And that why can only be answered by alienating the fact and not accepting, in a certain sense of denial, what we call in
Mm.
psychology. So the conflict is basically a denial of belief, that the belief came from, sorry, the idea of the thought that does not align with my schema does not come from me, but from something else that is not entirely me, because my set of
Mhm.
schemas does not allow me to do so, but rather actually it's just a conflict. It's a conflict of ideas which I would not
Yeah.
have in a state of normalcy. So rather than saying that it's an experience of alienation, it's a state of denial.
Okay, so let me go with order. Good on the scheme, good on the scheme. I like that. I agree. There is a very interesting book in medical anthropology where a phenomenologist and medical anthropologists examine how the brain, the image that we have of the brain, belongs to our body schema. And so, if you believe him, you might even infer that the sense of alienation just is a disturbance of a body schema, like anorexia nervosa.
Yeah.
Okay. That was very tempting to go that way. I'm not going that way, but it doesn't matter. I agree with you that, of course, involves the way we think, what we think normalcy is. I absolutely don't deny that. I'm not sure it's about it's a denial, because the patients do not believe that it's something else. They're not delusional. They don't have that belief. They know that it's just them, right? They know that they are not sick. So they are saying that they are not healed. They don't have a pathology. And in fact, the psychiatrists like Lewis and Kraepelin reports that these people think normally. They just suffer from something. They are not absurd. They don't endorse weird claims. They don't have delusional belief of any sort. They're kind of fine. They are just under some particular pain, some of which they can express, like difficulty of thinking, other of which is actually what they call the terrible case, the terrible situation, some of the patients. Then they can't really they can't really figure it out, right? But they are not denying that it's them. They know that it's them, but it's not me, it's the thinking. It's the only way they can use to articulate. So if you look at the experiences here, okay. Look at this. If asked if she thought she was weak, she replied, "No, I'm not. People think my thoughts are nasty, so they are. Oh no, they are not. It's my consciousness." I don't take it as a denial of the fact. She's not defending herself from the accusation, right? Look at the case that almost resemble a case of depersonalization. I don't feel here. No, it's not I that's talking, right? So these are all cases where it seems that these people are having a veridical experience. They are really trying to report the best that they can, a case that it's very difficult. I don't think it's denial. And also, the reason why I don't think it's denial is because this difficulty in subjectivities, they don't come with a cognitive aspect. It's not that patient never say anything cognitively relevant about these experiences. They also say all sort of thing. Oh, it looks like possession, but it's not. But they don't say if there is anything particular going wrong. It's something going wrong with the whole of them. That's why it's a form of subjectivity, right?
Just to clarify something there, what I meant by denial is not denying that it is me who's making such claims in my mind. What is denial is that there is a conflict. I'm not denying.
Elaborate.
If I'm the subject of depression in this particular instance, it's not that I'm denying that the thoughts are originating within me. that it's somebody else putting it. What I'm denying is that there can be conflict where I have to something a little bit similar to split personality. I mean, that's like going a little too far, but
Surely, yes. So yes, the experience of subjectivity, this difficulty in subjectivity, is conflictual because you experience something, you experience your resources and your capabilities being taken away from you. And not only that, because it's a visceral experience, one of the classic things of a visceral experience is the kind of demand that experience make. Suppose that you're hungry, right? You can resist, or thirsty. You can resist. At some point, whatever you're doing, you will stand up and eat or go to the toilet.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have no other option. You are under the command of your stomach.
Yeah.
And you're powerless because you can't decide otherwise.
I see.
Well, I mean, no, you can't. You can't. You can't. You can't decide. Oh, yeah, I feel like I have to pee, but I don't go. Or I feel like I have to eat, but no, I will not. It's simply impossible, right? In this sense of conflict, yes, absolutely. What I suggest is that, like the stomach does that thing to you, the brain does this thing to you. Okay, so because the brain is an organ, it's a physical organ that reacts to internal stimuli, whether homeostatic or not, because the brain is in the body, it's embodied, so it controls lots of processes, right? These processes are functions, are cognitive functions, right? And so if the body demands and the brain demands, these cognitive functions are affected, right? Because the body is a difference maker. It's not that it doesn't make any difference to be embodied or not embodied. It's a difference maker, right? So the brain, the embodied brain, it's kind of an alive thing. It's not a phenomenologically, cognitively blank, and it's just a platform for us. It's an organ. So because this organ also does one special thing, it doesn't digest food, but does one special thing, it thinks. Thinks instead of processing, like in terms of like the cognitive stuff of the difficulty in thinking, right? So there is still some cognitive processing, independent of whether or not you want to think that the sky is blue or solve the quadratic equation. That is on top. But below, the brain works. And so you can experience how the brain works, because the brain is a restless thing. It's actually an auto-equilibrium organ, right? So, and we know, I haven't touched on that, but we know that spontaneous brain activity, for instance, are activity that are not a bug, but a feature that modulate the way we think. And they actually, it's a good thing because it is less metabolic expensive for us. But that means that the brain thinks even when we are not in the standard way of thinking, right? So the idea is that when you have an experience of depressive thinking, with it comes this alienation, which is nothing but experiencing your brain in certain states. Your brain, not any thought content, right? Like you experience your stomach when you're hungry, you experience your brain when it fluctuates on that kind of activity. That's it.
All right. Yeah, that does make sense to me now.
I don't know. It's still a bit difficult. But...
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I
you're
had
very
a couple of
welcome.
questions, but then
Yes.
I also have to go. But so maybe I'll quickly ask them, and we should probably
No,
visit
shoot.
see, one is, of course, I mean, in the beginning, when you proposed a certain characterization of depression, right? Which came after your sort of, you felt the current characterization, especially as in the DSM, is not adequate, and which I mean, the most important or the interesting point there was how certain episodes of you know mental agitation of sorts or mental activity right did not fit well with the general passive conception of depression. Right. I mean, first, of course, is I think if you called it depression, I mean, there is a semantic barrier to cross, right? And allow anything that goes
Oh, no,
against the.
obviously, I'm talking about the
I know, no.
clinical phenomenon.
Correct. I know. I'm saying that itself not for you. I'm telling for people to allow. I mean, for clinicians to allow symptoms which go against the sort of image that depression sort of goes there. So, I mean, but more importantly, I was wondering if, see, while there might be certain episodes of aggressive, I mean, agitated mental activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe you did mention it, but what is the sort of duration of these? Is it something that is prolonged throughout your, I mean, the period that you are in some sense depressed, or is it spouts or spurts of aggressive activity? Because if it were the latter, I was wondering that while there might be such kind of, I mean, episodes of heightened mental activity, heightened mental cognitive activity, these might in turn lead to, eventual troughs of sorts, or, it's a bit like, bending a metal strip this way. I mean, really
Yeah,
aggressively, which only means that you're eventually weakening it on some sort. I don't know. So while there might be such, while it's not possible to characterize, I mean, depression purely in terms of passive phenomena or passive mental activity, but you also need. But eventually, is there an overarching base of passivity into which the aggravated mental activity also feed into?
So, okay, so what you're so here's the thing. The standard understanding that we have of unipolar MDD is the one that, for instance, Ratcliffe provides, okay, which is in reality just the lower peak of the valley. So what is the idea according to some people, especially those who believe in the primacy of mania? The idea is that you have an activity that is generally, because you are, when you are diagnosed with depression, that means that this diagnosis is also a statement about your brain. Your brain is of a particular kind, disposed to be overexcited, disposed to be mentally agitated. The more mental agitation, according to these people, the more you burn your brain and you fall into that kind of like normal state that we call depression. The mistake is to think that depression is just a low valley. No, depression is the whole cognitive process of depressed brain. Okay. So what is that it happens is that if you suffer from depression, you should be very careful in overusing your brain, because you know that you are disposed to overthink. And the more you are disposed to overthink and the more you do it, the more your mind, your brain works a lot. Finally, you put your brain in such a state of overexcitement that in prolonged amount of time, it burns you out. It consumes all of your energy, right? The duration, so technically as a DSM, you're looking at MDD for an episode that lasts a minimum of 2-3 weeks. Okay. This is generally the duration for which you can call an episode of major depression. Okay. But thinking depression in terms of this kind of like volatility, excitement, the question really doesn't make sense, because a depressed person simply have a particular kind of brain, right? So it doesn't matter for how long these episodes last. It's not the case that when the episode is over, you're not depressed anymore. You're always depressed. If you have a diagnosis, it's a claim about a brain, right? So what you should do is to know your brain better, right? So to avoid overexciting this brain. As I was saying before, the only reason why we don't think that working a lot, for instance, it's bad, it's simply cultural, because we think that productivity creativity. These are positive things, right? Most often than not, we forgot that creativity and productivity, most often than not, results from manic states. States where the person is deeply involved and it can get away from the problem that they are working on. I'm simply describing sometimes when we write paper in metaphysics. I'm not describing any particular difficult experience here, right? So
Or
that
any
kind of
writing at all,
stuff.
actually.
Yeah.
See, but I am a little wary of, I mean, I wonder if the cultural explanation for why that tends to get ignored is because, I mean, surely in other psychopathological conditions, say, for example, obsessive and compulsive disorder, which also comes with certain kinds of, uh, uh, you know, enhanced or not enhanced as much as uh, enhanced cognitive activity.
Yeah,
Rushed cognitive activity is clearly recognized as pathological of in some sort, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's
I think culturally it's really depends. So for instance, in Japan, so while the majority of the diagnosis for depression in US and UE are of unipolar major depressive disorder, which is the way they call depressive disorder with no other manic component, okay? In Japan, almost no diagnoses are unipolar historically, but bipolar, manic and depressive, which means a overactivity of thinking and low tide. What it's all. It's really, it really depends, right?
really okay.
It's really depend on how depression is understood and brain
so,
function is understood.
Yeah. So if
Right?
the point was about specific diagnosis in certain cultural context, then that makes sense.
Yeah. And there are these aspects that you have to take into account. And generally, if you survey the recent literature, more updated literature of depression, it turns out that the 35 to 55% of the depressive diagnoses are not unipolar at all, even in Europe and US. So what has happened, very likely, is that the definition of the disorder has been given in terms of a phenomenological ideology that history of psychiatry has borrowed acritically from philosophy and has built a diagnosis, which is a medical thing, based on that, right? And now we are reversing the direction because we are actually going back to how even Aretaus of Cappadocia, which is one of the most famous Greek doctors at the time, 4th century, he had this understanding of depression. He understood depression to be the kind of stuff that comes out of an overexciting evil, he used to call it. So the idea that depression is this fluctuation due to overexcitement of the brain is as old as psychiatry. It's only in the last century that at some point the cognitive character of the depression has been left behind, right? Now we are going back to taking it again, I guess, hopefully.
But again, there's a second question also sort of, I mean, it really touches upon this point of the cognitive affective distinction, right? Say, for example, I mean, obviously, I see why the distinction is very useful. Often is to be more, I mean, in any case. But say, for example, when you try to define affordances, right, in terms of, or one of the characteristics of depression as it relates to affordances as a certain thing does not afford itself as viable or something, right? And that you say is a cognitive affordance, right?
Yeah.
See, that's where, I mean, I can understand why you say it as a cognitive affordance, but I really want to sort of step back and say, is that really a purely cognitive mental state, as opposed to whether something presents itself as presents itself to you as amenable for a certain kind of use, right? Say when you come across a conference and whether it presents itself, the notification presents itself to you as a conference that you could participate in, right? For example, I mean, of course, it's a cognitive judgment, but I don't know if that cognitive judgment is in itself constitutive. I mean, it's constituted by certain affective phenomenology, which we just, in some sense, process and report as cognitive.
I see. Yeah, very complicated. So, yeah, so I don't want to go, for instance, I don't want to talk about like stuff like mindness, quality of thoughts that we recognize as ours just because we have this quality of mindness. I think it's exotic creatures. I do want to say, definitely, like an example of the conference that you make, that this thought is for me, okay, as you
So the
said.
point I'm not pointing towards is not that you're missing the forminess, which of course is, I mean, the qualitative feature. I'm keeping that aside. But even for me, is it merely a cognitive phenomenology?
Yeah, that's how I understand it. I don't
which is surely
think.
removed from the affective, because I don't know, it's something like when you judge something as, oh, something beyond my reach or something in my reach.
Yeah.
I wonder if there is already an affective component,
Yeah.
not a
Okay, yeah.
forminess.
I agree. So I don't deny. I mean, I'm not saying at all actually that talking about cognitive affordances is not talking about affective response, right? So the idea is the following: is that the affective response is predatory on the cognitive affordances, in the sense that suppose that I'm intelligent and I like to solve quadratic equation for breakfast, okay? I have a thought, the content of this thought is propositional, maybe it's a quadratic equation. This quadratic equation afford me calculating or solving this quadratic equation. And what happened when I achieve this goal? And obviously it's an achievement, and it can only be an achievement if you embrace affordances, right? Because affordances are skill disposition, the successful execution of which is the achievement. So calculating is a successful execution. What happened when it's successfully executed? You're happy. You have fun, right? What happened when you can? You're frustrated, right? So this is an affective dimension. This comes with cognitive affordances.
Again, so I am not talking about if the cognitive, I mean, the dispositions or the cognitive affordances themselves result in affective phenomena for the subject, which they do. But I'm asking whether something presents itself to you as something that you can engage with in a particular way. Is that a purely cognitive phenomenon? Not if this cognitive phenomenon, based on the outcome of how you engage with it, can lead to affective phenomena. Obviously, it can. But the question of whether something, say a conference, presents itself to you as something that you can, pick up and engage with, or something beyond your reach or something like that, is that purely a cognitive phenomenon? I don't know if it can be.
Okay, I understood.
It's a bit like it's a bit like say, for example, I mean, if I were to use a metaphor, I mean, an analogy, it's when, say, a speed breaker on the road is presented to you. I mean, I could say, hey, instead of presenting itself as a speed breaker, it presents itself a mountain that I need to climb and get down. Which, when presented this way, it's almost like it seems to be a purely cognitive phenomenon. But I wonder if that's just a manner of speaking. So when I say it presents itself as a mountain rather than a speed breaker, a speed bump, is there an affective component which is constitutive of the presentation of a speed breaker as a mountain, for example?
See what I mean. So for the kind of cognitive experience of the difficulty in thinking, I think I have to say this is just like cognitive phenomenology devoid on anything. But obviously, I agree with you that proposition like, I don't know, I have this thought in my head that is really oppressive. We might tend to think that this proposition might be true when true. And if true, I agree with you that it captures an affective component. There is a thought, and it presents to you as oppressive, right?
or
Now,
beyond my reach, or something that I can't handle.
Yeah. So it really depends experience from experiences, but at least in the experience of difficulty in thinking, where you do have actually this kind of like affective responses, these affective responses do not enter in the cognitive experience. When you have a cognitive experience, you fail at doing something in your head, right? That's it. Hi, Varun. You fail to do something in your head. That's it, right? The affective change is, to me, an aspect of this metacognitive experience of difficulty in thinking. Because when you say this thought is oppressive, that is a metacognitive experience to me. It's not an affective experience. I don't read it as affective. I read it that I have a thought whose content is another thought. And the first thought tells me that some other thought is oppressive, right? So it's a metacognitive judgment. Why it's affective? I don't
Okay, I can tell
understand
you. I
it.
don't know. I mean, I see why you're saying this, but I wonder there, I mean, what sort of goes behind this is you begin with the phenomenology, but then you analyze the phenomenology in terms of its propositional content, right?
Yeah, because it's cognitive, so I can do that.
So I mean, I no, it's so which I mean, I wonder if it seems like cognitive because only you're abstracting away only the propositional content, right? I don't know. I mean, I don't have another. I don't know what else you could analyze it in front of. I mean,
no. I agree with you.
easy way to say is to say analyze it in terms of the subjective qualitative feel, but that's as good as saying okay, you can't really analyze it.
I must confess that it's true. You're completely right that it's cognitive because I make it such in a sense. But I'm not right because I say so in the sense that I acknowledge there is an affective character of this metacognitive experience. Do I care? No, because my job in this paper is just to hammer on what needs to be done. Am I really sure that there is an affective character? No. Right. So I go with the flow and I buy their view that they say there is an affective character, but whether this character is affective or is simply a metacognitive judgment, right? So suppose you have a metacognitive judgment when, I don't know, we are talking here right now, and in my head, I notice that my left eye continuously goes to something moving outside, but I do so inattentively. Now, what I'm doing is I'm thinking about, I have a thought about whose content is another thought, like, looking outside. And then I say that this thing that I'm doing is also inattentive. I'm doing it in a certain way, unattentively, right? So to me, it might also be that at the end of the day, this kind of like affective proposition that regards thoughts might be nothing but metacognitive judgments that has nothing to do with picking a mood or picking a feeling. That doesn't mean that they have nothing to do with feeling. They might simply be accompanied or associated. Why? For a reason we don't care, right? But I'm not sure if this affective example push for an identification of affective and metacognitive judgment, or rather it's just metacognitive judgment, and this metacognitive judgment, like Euclides says, these are kind of experiences that are cognitive, but they travest themselves with a person in a personal way, okay? So they inform you about something cognitive as if it's not just propositional, right? But it's about you. It might be the affective
I think I
dimension.
understand the sort of the
So
interplay
again,
between the
my job
methodology
here,
and the ontology here.
My job here was to make sure that I can talk to people like Ratcliffe and Fuchs, but if I want to go full blown, I will simply develop a cognitive phenomenology for which, moods are secondary, if there are even any. So experiencing in the head are just, cognitive. There are embodied one, but these affective things of mood in the head is just like weird.
All right. I think we have only two other folks left with us. So before they also leave, I think we should call it a day. But thanks a lot, Andrea, for this
Thanks for the
wonderful talk.
invitation, Guy.
Yeah.
I'll promise. Sorry, I was late, but also I wrote another paper. I thought about maybe giving this paper, but this was probably more enjoyable than the other.
Yes.
And also speak soon. I mean, we are waiting for you in 20 days, then something like that.
Yes, we'll
right.
meet
So
soon.
we will do it live then.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend. See
Thanks
you,
so
Alia.
much.
Thank you.